The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as Alara pressed her face against the cold iron bars, watching the Moonstone Palace rise before her like a monument to everything she would never be. The structure gleamed white and silver under the full moon, its towers piercing the night sky with an arrogance that made her stomach twist. She was one of 12 Omegas crammed into the transport, all of them sold or traded to fulfill debts their packs could not pay. The air inside reeked of fear and unwashed bodies. But Alara had long ago learned to breathe through her mouth and keep her eyes down. Survival meant invisibility, and invisibility meant silence. The other Omegas whispered frantically among themselves, sharing rumors about the Alpha King who ruled from behind those pristine walls. Kale Moonstone, they said, was a monster wrapped in beautiful skin. He had taken the throne 5 years ago after his father's mysterious death, and in those 5 years, he had transformed the kingdom from a place of relative peace into a military fortress. Alphas who displeased him vanished. Betas who questioned his orders were stripped of their titles. And Omegas were barely considered people at all in his court. They were objects, commodities, things to be used and discarded. Alara listened to these whispers, with the same detached interest she might give to stories about distant lands she would never visit. What did it matter what kind of monster ruled here? She would scrub floors and peel potatoes in the kitchens, keep her head down, and maybe, if she was lucky, live long enough to see her 25th birthday. The carriage jerked to a stop before massive double doors carved with wolves in various states of transformation. Guards in silver armor yanked the cage door open and barked orders, pulling Omegas out one by one and shoving them into a ragged line. Alara stumbled as rough hands pushed her forward, catching herself just before she fell. The guard who had shoved her sneered, his hand already raising for a backhand that would teach her to be more graceful. But before his palm could connect with her cheek, another guard caught his wrist mid-swing. The second guard said nothing, just shook his head once, slow and deliberate. The first guard went pale, lowering his hand immediately and stepping back as though Alara had suddenly burst into flames. She blinked, confused, but kept her eyes down as she had been trained. Confusion was dangerous. Questions were dangerous. She filed the moment away and shuffled forward with the others. Inside the palace, everything was cold marble and colder faces. The head of household, a severe beta woman named Margot, inspected them with the enthusiasm of someone examining spoiled meat. She assigned roles with brutal efficiency, barely glancing at faces as she pointed Omegas toward the laundry, the stables, the scullery. When she reached Alara, Margot paused, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across her features. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual mask of indifference. "Kitchen duty," she declared, and moved on. Alara followed a younger servant down a maze of corridors, trying to memorize the turns and failing. The palace was enormous, a labyrinth designed to swallow people whole. The kitchens were hot and chaotic, filled with the clang of pots and the shouts of head cooks bullying their staffs into perfection. Alara was given a corner station and a mountain of vegetables that needed peeling. She worked mechanically, her hands moving while her mind drifted to the small freedoms she had lost. Her old pack had been cruel, yes, but at least she had known the landscape, known which corners to hide in when the alphas got violent. Here, everything was unknown territory. She would have to learn the rhythms of this place, figure out who could be trusted and who would sell her out for a copper coin. The other kitchen Omegas ignored her, which was fine. Alara had never been good at making friends anyway. 3 days passed in a blur of peeling, chopping, and scrubbing. Alara learned the kitchen hierarchy quickly. The head cook was a beta named Renard, who ruled his domain with shouted insults and a wooden spoon he was not afraid to use. Beneath him were 3 Sioux cooks, all alphas, who treated the Omega staff like mobile furniture. The work was exhausting, but Alara had expected that. What she had not expected were the strange moments when someone would start to berate her or shove her aside, only to suddenly stop mid-motion, their faces draining of color. It happened again when a Sioux cook caught her taking a moment to rest her aching feet. He had opened his mouth to scream at her, his face already red with rage, when his eyes flicked to something over her shoulder, and all the color left his cheeks. He swallowed his words, turned on his heel, and walked away without another glance. Alara spun around to see what had frightened him, but there was nothing there except an empty doorway. The whispers started on her fourth day. Alara caught fragments of conversations that died the moment she walked past. The other servants looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and fear, giving her a wide berth in the corridors. One brave beta kitchen maid finally approached her during the evening meal, sliding onto the bench across from Alara, with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. "Do you know why they are afraid?" the maid asked quietly. Alara shook her head, genuinely baffled. The maid leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say the king watches you. They say he has given orders that no one is to touch you, speak harshly to you, or interfere with you in any way. Those who forget this rule disappear." Alara's spoon clattered against her bowl. "That is insane," she whispered back. "I have never even seen the king." The maid shrugged. "Nevertheless, it is what people say. Be careful. Protection from a king like Kale Moonstone is not always a blessing." That night, Alara could not sleep. She lay in her narrow cot in the servants' dormitory, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of impossibilities. Why would an alpha king care about one insignificant omega kitchen worker? She was nobody, nothing, a girl without a pack or a name worth remembering. If you are enjoying this story, please consider liking this video and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. She had no special skills, no hidden beauty, no secret lineage that would make her valuable. She was just Alara, the girl who was good at being invisible. Except now, apparently, she was anything but invisible. The next morning, she decided to test the theory. When the Sioux cook who had backed away from her earlier started barking orders, Alara deliberately moved too slowly, waiting to see if he would yell at her as he did the other Omegas. His mouth opened, rage building in his eyes, but then that same flicker of fear crossed his face, and he turned his fury on the Omega next to her instead. Alara felt sick. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, she was being protected by someone powerful enough to make alphas swallow their pride and walk away. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern never changed. Alara existed in a bubble of untouchability that made her more isolated than any cruelty could have. The other servants avoided her, terrified of being associated with whatever strange game the king was playing. She ate alone, worked alone, and spent her rare free hours walking the palace gardens alone, always feeling the weight of invisible eyes on her shoulders. She never saw the king. Not once. The palace was enormous, and the royal family kept to the upper floors, while servants haunted the lower levels like ghosts. But she felt him, or at least she felt the presence of whoever was watching her. It was a pressure against her skin, a constant awareness that made her careful of every word and every movement. The first time Alara caught a glimpse of King Kale was during a formal dinner that required all available staff. She was assigned to help serve in the Great Hall, carrying platters of roasted meat to tables filled with visiting alphas from neighboring packs. The hall was magnificent, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across marble floors. At the head of the room, elevated on a dais, sat the king. Alara's breath caught despite herself. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. All sharp edges and controlled power. His hair was black as a moonless night, his eyes a pale silver that seemed to glow in the candlelight. He sat perfectly still, listening to a visiting diplomat, with an expression of polite boredom that somehow made him more intimidating. Alara forced herself to look away, to focus on her task, but her hands trembled as she set down a platter. She could feel those silver eyes on her, heavy and assessing, but when she dared to glance up again, he was looking elsewhere, his attention on the alpha to his right. She must have imagined it. She served the rest of the meal in a daze, hyper-aware of every movement, but the king never looked her way again. Or if he did, he was too skilled at hiding it for her to catch. That night, she dreamed of silver eyes and protective shadows, She woke with her heart racing and the certainty that something was going to change, that the fragile balance of her existence was about to shatter. She was right. The next morning, Margot summoned her to the head of household's office with a curt message delivered by a page. Alara climbed the stairs to the administrative wing with growing dread, trying to think of what she might have done wrong. Margot's office was austere, all dark wood and carefully organized chaos. The beta woman looked up from her ledgers as Alara entered, her expression unreadable. "Close the door," she instructed. Alara obeyed, her pulse hammering. Margot studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you know why the king has taken an interest in you?" Alara shook her head mutely. Margot sighed, rubbing her temples. "I did not think so. You are either the best liar I have ever met, or you truly are as ignorant as you appear. For your sake, I hope it is the latter." Margot stood, moving to the window that overlooked the courtyard. "There are forces in this palace that would see you dead if they understood what you represent," she said quietly. "There are others who would use you as a weapon against the king. You are in danger, child, whether you understand why or not." Alara found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I do not understand any of this. I am nobody. Why would the king care about me?" Margot turned, and for the first time, Alara saw something like pity in her eyes. "That is precisely the question everyone is asking. Until we have an answer, you need to be more careful. Trust no one, accept no gifts, eat only food you have seen prepared. And if anyone at all, tries to get you alone, you run. Do you understand?" Alara nodded, though understanding felt far away. Margot dismissed her with a wave, and Alara fled back to the familiar chaos of the kitchens, her mind spinning with new fears. The attempt on her life came 3 days later. Alara was walking back to the dormitory after a late shift, exhausted and thinking only of her bed. The corridor was empty, lit by flickering torches that threw dancing shadows on stone walls. She did not hear the footsteps behind her until it was almost too late. Instinct made her turn, and that turning saved her life. The blade that had been aimed at her spine caught her shoulder instead, slicing through fabric and skin with a burning pain that made her gasp. Her attacker was masked, dressed in the nondescript clothing of a servant, but the hands that gripped the knife were strong and sure. This was no amateur. Alara stumbled backward, pressing her good hand to the wound as blood seeped between her fingers. The attacker advanced, raising the blade for another strike. Alara opened her mouth to scream, but terror had stolen her voice. The shadow that fell over her attacker seemed to materialize from nothing. One moment the corridor was empty except for the two of them. The next moment a figure in black had the attacker pinned against the wall with inhuman speed. Alara blinked, trying to focus through the pain and shock. The figure was tall, radiating an alpha presence so powerful it made the air feel thick. The attacker struggled for only a moment before going limp. Whether from unconsciousness or death, Alara could not tell. The figure in black turned, and Alara found herself staring into those pale silver eyes she had seen only once before. King Kale looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between fury and anguish twisting his perfect features. He took a step toward her, and Alara flinched instinctively, her back hitting the wall. The king froze, his jaw clenching. Then he did something that made no sense at all. He pulled off his own cloak and held it out to her, his eyes carefully averted, not meeting hers. "For your wound," he said, his voice rough. "Press it against the bleeding." Alara took the cloak with shaking hands, too shocked to do anything else. The fabric was soft as silk and warm from his body. She pressed it to her shoulder as instructed, hissing at the pressure. The king stood there, still not looking at her, his whole body tense as a drawn bow. "Why?" Alara whispered. The words seemed to cost her everything. "Why are you protecting me?" For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear. "Because you are the last one. The last of a line I helped destroy. Because I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." and because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to burn the world down." He still did not look at her. Before Alara could respond, could even begin to process those words, he was gone, vanished into the shadows as completely as he had appeared. Guards appeared moments later, summoned by some signal she had not seen. They took the unconscious attacker away and escorted Alara to the palace infirmary, where a healer stitched her wound with efficiency and no questions asked. The next 3 days passed in a fog. Alara was given a private recovery room, a luxury that confirmed everything and explained nothing. Margot visited once, bringing clean clothes and a troubled expression. "The king has requested that you be moved to the East Wing when you recover," she said carefully. "You will have your own quarters. You will no longer work in the kitchens." Alara stared at her. "What will I do instead?" Margot shook her head. "That I cannot tell. I do not think anyone knows, except the king himself. The attack has forced his hand. Whatever he was waiting for, whatever timeline he had planned, it no longer matters. Things are going to change, child. I hope you are ready, but how could anyone be ready for the impossible?" Alara spent her recovery trying to piece together the king's cryptic words. The last of a line he helped destroy. What line? What destruction? She had always believed herself to be nobody, an omega born to a small pack, with no history worth recording. Her parents had died when she was young, and the pack had raised her as a collective burden, keeping her alive, but investing nothing in her future. When they sold her to pay debts, she had felt betrayed, but not surprised. Omegas were currency in the world of wolves. That was simply how things worked. But what if there was more to her story? What if her parents had hidden something, protected her from something? The questions circled endlessly, making sleep impossible. On the 4th day, a servant came to escort her to her new quarters. The East Wing was a part of the palace she had never seen, reserved for minor nobility and important guests. Her rooms were modest by noble standards but palatial compared to the dormitory cot she had known. There was a bedroom with an actual bed, a sitting room with comfortable chairs, and a small bathing room with running water. It was more luxury than she had experienced in her entire life. The servant who had escorted her hesitated at the door. "The king has requested your presence in his private study at sunset," she said nervously. "A guard will come to fetch you. Do not be late." Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with her spiraling thoughts and the certainty that tonight, finally, she would get answers. Sunset came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The guard who arrived to escort her was stone-faced and silent, leading her through corridors she did not recognize to a part of the palace that felt older, more intimate than the formal staterooms. He stopped before a heavy wooden door, carved with phases of the moon, and knocked twice. A voice from within called for entry. The guard opened the door, gestured for Alara to enter, and closed it behind her, leaving her alone with the Alpha King. The study was warm, lit by a fireplace and soft lamplight. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk dominated one corner, covered in maps and correspondence. King Kale stood by the window, his back to her, staring out at the gardens below. He was dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in simple black pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Somehow, the informal clothing made him more intimidating, more real. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. If you are finding this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We have many more stories coming that explore love, power, and redemption. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing to a chair near the fire without turning around. "Please." Alara sat, perching on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt at any moment. The king took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like grief. 20 years ago, this kingdom was ruled by my father, Aldrich Moonstone. He was a tyrant in every sense of the word. Cruel, paranoid, drunk on power. He believed that strength came from domination, that alphas were superior to all other designations, and that omegas existed only to serve. There was a faction within the nobility who disagreed with him, who believed in a different way. They were led by a group called the Silver Circle. And at the heart of that circle was the royal Omega line, a bloodline of Omegas who carried ancient magic in their veins. They were healers, seers, peacekeepers. They had the power to challenge alpha dominance with gifts that did not rely on physical strength. My father saw them as a threat. Kyle finally turned to face her, and Alara was struck by the raw pain in his silver eyes. When I was 15 years old, my father ordered the massacre of the Silver Circle. Every Omega of the royal line was hunted down and killed. Men, women, children. It did not matter. They were slaughtered like animals, their bodies burned, their names erased from history. And I, his dutiful son, helped coordinate the military forces that carried out his orders. I told myself I had no choice, that I was protecting my own life, that I was too young to stand against him. But the truth is simpler and more damning. I was a coward. The silence that followed was deafening. Alara sat frozen, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what he was telling her. The king moved to his desk, pulling out a leather folder that he brought to her. Inside were documents, old and yellowed with age, birth records, family trees, a portrait of a young Omega woman with Alara's eyes. Your mother's name was Seraphina of the royal line, Kyle said quietly. She was 23 when the massacre happened. Somehow, she escaped. She fled to a small pack on the borders, changed her name, and hid her true nature. She had you a year later. I have spent the last 5 years searching for any survivors of the royal line, trying to undo even a fraction of the damage my family caused. When I finally found records suggesting that Seraphina might have had a child, I searched every small pack in the kingdom. When your pack put you up for sale, one of my agents recognized the markers, the shape of your eyes, the scent beneath the suppressants you have been taking without knowing why. You are the last living Omega of the royal line, Alara. You are royalty by blood and by birthright, and I am the monster who helped murder your family. Alara could not breathe, could not think. The room spun around her, and she gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling. This could not be real. It was too enormous, too impossible. She was nobody. She was nothing. She was just Alara, the girl who peeled potatoes and kept her head down. But the documents in her lap told a different story. And deep in her bones, in some place she had always ignored, something whispered that it was true. Why? She finally managed to ask. Why tell me this? Why protect me? Why not just kill me quietly and erase the last reminder of what you did? Kale flinched as though she had struck him. Because you deserve to. Know the truth. Because this kingdom deserves better than what my father built, and what I have maintained. Because when I first caught your scent, when I first saw you, every instinct I have screamed that you were my fated mate. And the irony of that is so cruel, it feels like punishment from the gods themselves. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only bitterness. The Omega who should hate me most in this world is destined to be my perfect match. The universe has a sick sense of humor. But I will not trap you with a mate bond you did not choose. I will not use fate to absolve myself of crimes, or to claim something I have not earned. You will have your freedom, Alara. You will have your birthright. And you will have a choice that no one in your family was given. Stay and help me transform this kingdom into what it should have been, or leave with enough resources to build whatever life you choose far from here. I will accept either decision, but I will not speak to you of mates or bonds or destiny until you are ready, if you ever are. I owe you that much, at least. Alara stood on shaking legs, the documents falling from her lap. She should run. She should scream. She should feel something other than this strange numbness that had settled over her like snow. You have been watching me this whole time, she said, her voice distant to her own ears. Protecting me. Never speaking to me. Why? Kale's expression was a mixture of shame and longing. Because I did not trust myself. Because every time I see you, I want to fall at your feet and beg forgiveness I do not deserve. Because speaking to you, acknowledging you, felt like claiming something that was never mine to claim. So I protected you from the shadows, like the coward I have always been, and I told myself it was enough, but it was not enough. It will never be enough. Nothing I do will bring back the family you should have known, the life you should have lived. But if you let me, I will spend the rest of my existence trying to build something better from the ruins." Alara walked to the window, needing distance, needing air. Below, the palace gardens stretched out in geometric perfection, beautiful and cold. Like everything in this place. Like the man behind her who had just turned her entire world inside out. Part of her wanted to hate him. And that part was loud and insistent. But another part, a part that confused and frightened her, understood that he had been a child when the massacre happened, manipulated by a monster, trapped in a system that rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. It did not absolve him. Nothing could absolve him. But it complicated the simple narrative of victim and villain, and Alara had never been good at navigating complicated things. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think, to process this. All of this." "Of course," Kyle said immediately. "Take all the time you need. Your quarters are yours for as long as you want them. You are free to go anywhere in the palace, to access any records you wish to read about your family. I have collected everything I could find about the royal line. It is yours." Alara turned to face him. "And if I decide to leave? If I take your resources and disappear? Then I will let you go," he said simply. "And I will protect you from afar for the rest of your life, whether you know it or not, because that is what you do for someone you love, even if they can never love you back." The word love hung between them like a confession and a curse. Alara fled before she could examine why it made her chest ache. She spent the next week buried in documents, reading about the family she had never known. Her mother had been a healer, renowned for her ability to sense illness before symptoms appeared. Her grandmother had been an advisor to 3 generations of kings. Her counsel sought on everything from agricultural policy to conflict resolution. The royal Omega line had not been weak creatures to be dominated. They had been pillars of the kingdom, using gifts that alpha arrogance had tried to erase, but could never truly destroy. Reading about them, Alara felt grief for people she had never met, and rage at a world that had decided they were disposable. She also watched the king, though she told herself it was simple observation, gathering information before making a decision. Kyle ran his kingdom with military precision, but she noticed cracks in the tyrannical facade everyone assumed. He met regularly with a council that included betas and even a few omegas, listening to their concerns with genuine attention. He had quietly repealed several of his father's cruelest laws, replacing them with policies that offered more protection to lower designations. He was trying, she realized, trying to undo decades of damage without sparking a civil war among the alpha nobility who benefited from the old ways. It was a delicate balance, and he was walking it alone, trusting no one completely because trust was a luxury he could not afford. She found herself feeling something dangerously close to sympathy, and that terrified her more than anything else. One evening, she returned to her quarters to find a package on her bed. Inside was a book, leather-bound and ancient, with her family crest embossed on the cover. A note in Kale's precise handwriting explained that it was her grandmother's personal journal, recovered from a hiding place his agents had discovered. Alara spent the entire night reading, tears streaming down her face as her grandmother's voice came alive on the pages. The journal spoke of hope and frustration, of trying to guide a kingdom toward enlightenment while battling entrenched prejudice. It spoke of love for her family and fear for their future. The final entry, written days before the massacre, was haunting in its prescience. If you are reading this, it means we failed. It means the darkness won, and the light was extinguished. But remember, little one, that light always returns. It may take generations, but it always returns. Do not let their cruelty make you cruel. Do not let their hate teach you to hate. Be better than they were. Be the change they feared. Alara closed the journal with shaking hands, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Be the change they feared. The next morning, she requested an audience with the king. They met in the same study where he had revealed the truth, but this time Alara was the one who controlled the conversation. I have Made my decision, she said without preamble. I will stay, but not as your mate. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. I will stay as what I was always meant to be, as what my family would have been if they had lived. I will stay as the Royal Omega, and I will help you transform this kingdom into something worthy of the blood that was spilled to try to change it. But I have conditions. Kale nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Name them. First, you will establish a council of Omegas with real power, not symbolic positions. They will have equal voice in all major decisions. Second, you will publicly acknowledge the massacre and what your father did. No more hiding the truth. Third, you will fund schools that teach Omega children they have value beyond their designation. And fourth, she took a breath. You will never lie to me. About anything. Ever. Even if the truth is ugly or painful or makes me hate you. I need honesty, or this will never work. Done, Kyle said without hesitation. All of it. I will make the proclamation about the massacre this week. I will personally oversee the creation of the Omega Council, and I swear to you, on my life and on the memory of everyone I failed, that I will never lie to you. Alara studied him, looking for deception and finding only exhausted sincerity. Then we have an accord, she said. Not a partnership, not a relationship. An accord. For now. For now, Kale agreed, and something that might have been hope flickered in his silver eyes before he carefully extinguished it. The proclamation sent shockwaves through the kingdom. King Kale stood before the assembled court and confessed to his role in the massacre, his voice never wavering as he detailed atrocities that made nobles gasp and servants weep. He introduced Alara as the last surviving member of the Royal Omega line and announced her elevation to a newly created position, Royal Omega Advisor, with authority equal to his own council members. The alpha nobility exploded in outrage, but Kale met their fury with cold steel. This is not a debate, he said, his alpha presence flooding the room with suffocating power. This is how things will be. Adapt or abdicate your positions. The choice is yours. Not everyone adapted peacefully. There were 3 assassination attempts in the first month alone, 2 targeting Alara and 1 targeting Kyle. They survived through a combination of Kyle's paranoid security measures and Alara's emerging gifts. She discovered that her Omega abilities, suppressed for so long, were beginning to manifest. She could sense danger before it arrived, could read emotions like books written in languages only she understood. It was frightening and exhilarating in equal measure. Kale helped her train, finding old texts about Royal Omega magic and hiring a retired Omega scholar who had studied the old ways in secret. Slowly, grudgingly, they became something like friends. Alara learned that behind his cold exterior, Kale had a dry sense of humor and a surprising love of terrible poetry. He learned that she had a vicious strategic mind and absolutely no patience for political games. They worked together to draft legislation, to negotiate with resistant pacts, to slowly, painfully drag the kingdom towards something resembling justice. The mate bond simmered between them like a pot always on the verge of boiling over. Alara felt it constantly, a pull toward him that had nothing to do with his appearance or his power, and everything to do with some fundamental compatibility of souls. She knew he felt it too, saw it in the way his hands clenched when she stood too close, in the way his eyes followed her across rooms, in the careful distance he always maintained. They never spoke of it. That was the unspoken rule between them. Work was safe, friendship was allowed, but anything more lived in the territory of forbidden things. Because how could she trust that her feelings were real, when fate had stacked the deck so completely? 6 months. After her revelation, the Omega Council held its first official session. 12 Omegas from across the kingdom, chosen by their communities, gathered in a room that had once been used for storage, and was now a council chamber decorated with symbols of the royal line. Alara sat among them, not as their leader, but as their equal, and listened as they spoke of dreams and grievances, of hopes for their children and anger at systems that had crushed them for generations. It was messy and beautiful, and exactly what her grandmother had fought for. Kyle attended as an observer, saying nothing, just listening with the intensity he brought to everything. Afterward, he found Alara in the gardens where she often went to think. They walked in comfortable silence, falling into step naturally. "You did well today," he said finally. "They trust you." Alara shook her head. "They trust what I represent. The idea of what Omegas could be. I am still figuring out how to live up to that." "You are already living up to it," Kale said quietly. "Every day, you choose to be here, to fight for this, even though being here means being near me, even though I am the living reminder of everything you lost. That takes more courage than I have ever possessed." They had reached a secluded corner of the garden, surrounded by night-blooming flowers that released their perfume into the cool air. Alara stopped walking, turning to face him. The moonlight turned his hair to silver and made his eyes glow. She realized, with a start, that she had stopped seeing him as the enemy weeks ago, maybe even months ago. Somewhere between late-night strategy sessions and early morning training, between shared laughter over legislative absurdities and shared grief over what could never be undone, he had become something else, something more complicated than hate, and more dangerous than indifference. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart hammering. "And it is going to sound insane." Kale went very still, his expression carefully controlled. "I am listening. I think," Alara took a breath, forcing the words out, "I think I am starting to forgive you. Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was excusable, but because holding on to that rage is exhausting. And because I see what you are trying to do, what you are trying to become. And I think maybe my grandmother would tell me that forgiveness is not about absolving you. It is about freeing myself." Kale looked like she had stabbed him. "Alara," he started, his voice rough. "Do not forgive me. I do not want your forgiveness. I want to earn it. I am not done yet. There is still so much to fix, so much to change. I have barely started." "Too late," she said, and found herself smiling, despite the tears on her cheeks. "You do not get to decide when I forgive you. That is my choice to make, and I am making it. It does not mean I have forgotten. It does not mean everything is fine. It just means I am choosing not to carry this weight anymore." The kiss happened so naturally she was never quite sure who moved first. One moment they were standing apart. The next moment his hands were in her hair and her arms were around his neck. And they were finally giving in to the pull that had been torturing them both. He kissed like a man starving, like she was air and he had been drowning. She kissed back with equal desperation. 6 months of denial and desire crashing over them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I have loved you since the moment I first caught your scent. I will love you until the world ends and probably beyond. But if this is too fast, if you need more time, if you can never see me as anything but the monster who destroyed your family, I will understand. I will wait. I will wait forever if that is what you need." Alara laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "You are such an idiot," she said affectionately. "I love you too, you dramatic, self-flagellating fool. I love you despite every logical reason not to. I love you because of who you are trying to become, and because you make me want to be better too. And I love you because the universe apparently has a twisted sense of humor, giving me a mate who comes with the world's most complicated baggage." They stood in the garden until the moon set, talking about everything and nothing, stealing kisses between words, learning the geography of each other's bodies with tentative touches. When they finally returned to the palace, hand in hand, the guards who saw them pretended not to notice, though Alara caught more than one small smile. The next morning, Kyle made another proclamation, this one significantly more cheerful. He announced his intention to formally court Alara, asking for the Omega Council's blessing in a gesture that acknowledged her worth and their authority. The council debated for 3 hours before granting approval, with conditions that included a lengthy courtship period and mandatory couples counseling with the Omega scholar. Kale agreed to everything without argument, and Alara fell a little bit more in love with him for his willingness to be humble, to submit to judgment, to accept that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and that rebuilding trust required sustained effort. Their courtship became a public affair, the kingdom watching with fascination as their cold king transformed into someone capable of tenderness. Kyle courted Alara with a patience that belied his alpha nature, respecting every boundary she set, celebrating every step forward. He wrote her terrible poetry that made her laugh until she cried. He learned to cook her favorite foods, badly, and insisted on serving them anyway. He supported her work with the Omega Council, even when their decisions contradicted his own instincts. He was, Alara realized, genuinely trying to be worthy of her, and that effort meant more than any grand gesture ever could. 8 months into their courtship, on the anniversary of the proclamation, Kale asked her to marry him. He did it privately, in the same garden where they had first kissed, with no grand spectacle or expensive ring. Just him, on his knees in the dirt, offering her a simple silver band inscribed with her family crest. "I am still not worthy of you," he said quietly. "I may never be, but I will spend every day of my life trying. Will you marry me, Alara? Not because fate demands it, but because you choose it? Because we choose each other?" Alara pulled him to his feet, cupping his face in her hands. "You are right," she said. "You are not worthy of me. But I am choosing you anyway, because love is not about worthiness. It is about choice and effort, and building something better together. Yes, Kale Moonstone, I will marry you. I will be your queen and your partner and your greatest critic, and I will love you every day, even on the days when I also want to strangle you." The wedding took place 3 months later, a blend of old traditions and new ones. Alara wore a gown embroidered with symbols of the royal Omega line, reclaiming history that had been nearly erased. Kale wore his crown but knelt when they exchanged vows, a public acknowledgement that their union was one of equals. The Omega Council performed the binding ceremony, and when they were pronounced mates and monarchs, the cheers that rose from the assembled crowd were genuine. Not everyone was happy. There were still pacts that rejected the changes, still nobles who plotted in shadows. But Alara and Kale faced them together, a united front that was stronger than either could have been alone. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Alara's Omega abilities grew stronger, and she used them to heal rifts in the kingdom, to mediate disputes, to build bridges between designations that had been at war for generations. Kyle implemented sweeping reforms, dismantling the systems his father had built, and replacing them with structures that valued all wolves equally. They fought, often and passionately, because they were both stubborn and brilliant and convinced of their own righteousness. But they always fought fair, and they always came back to each other, because love was the foundation they built everything else on. 5 years after their wedding, Alara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The boy had Kale's silver eyes, and the girl had Alara's gift for sensing emotions. They were the future of the kingdom, living proof that Alpha and Omega together could create something extraordinary. As Alara held her children, with Kale's arms wrapped around all of them, she thought about her grandmother's words. Be the change they feared. She had done that. They had done that. And the light, finally, had returned. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed Alara and Kale's journey from silence to love, from guilt to redemption, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance stories. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Should we explore more stories about changing kingdoms and challenging destiny? Your support means everything, and we will see you in the next story.